Hey guys, and welcome to British Guy Reacts. Now I'm going to do something a little bit different today. For the very first time I'm going to react to a video that one of you suggested. I think it's a brilliant suggestion. I'm really excited. It's a biography of Theodore Roosevelt, who is someone I know a little bit about but not a huge amount. I know enough to know they're fascinating, or he's fascinating, but I don't know the details. So obviously a politician, the president, soldier. I believe he fought in the Spanish-American War with something called the Rough Riders, but I don't know what the Rough Riders are. I'm hoping to find out. Naturalist, although probably more in the Victorian sense of shooting at animals than the sort of David Attenborough narrating wildlife documentaries. A man of his time. Very much an outdoorsman, so I mean the kind of man who would make Chuck Norris question his masculinity. That's the level we're talking at. Very quickly, so someone did post on my last video saying that they were worried I was going to run out of videos to react to. I just wanted to reassure you that is not going to happen. Like the world, I will die, the world will implode in on itself before that happens. And even if I do run out, I'll just then react to react videos, so we can have a sort of chain of deteriorating content between all the different react channels. So yeah, that's something to look forward to. So save, I'm very excited for this video. It is from Biographies. It's called Theodore Roosevelt, the Old Lion, which I presume must be his nickname. And let's go.
Few would have believed that the frail, asthmatic little boy who loved to collect insects would...
I'm very reassured. For a start, I'm very reassured that there's hope for those of us who are frail. If that's all I take away from this video, it's already been a success.
To amount to anything special, much less the youngest and most robust president in US history. Okay. Theodore Roosevelt's transformation from sickly child to master of the bully pulpit and the ultimate symbol of American strength and vitality is an inspiring story of the power of self-determination. Right. In this week's Biographics, we uncover his story.
Yeah, let's go. So it's interesting to note that a guy who's famous for being macho started out very weak. Early life.
Theodore Roosevelt, the future 26th President of the United States, was born in New York City on October the 27th, 1858, to Theodore Roosevelt Sr. and Martha Bullock Roosevelt. Roosevelt Sr. was one of the leading citizens of New York City. Theodore Jr., who was known as TD, was the second child to the affluent couple who lived in a luxurious home.
Okay, I'm comparing it to Abraham Lincoln just because I've just done the American Civil War videos. But Lincoln, I think, was from quite a modest background. So it's really interesting that Roosevelt is from a much more affluent background. So you've got two very kind of iconic American presidents coming from very different social backgrounds. I think it's fascinating.
Manhattan Island. TD had a sister, Anna, who was 4 years older than him. A younger brother, Elliot, would follow 2 years later.
Moustache.
And then there was another sister, Corinne, a year after that. TD suffered from asthma from the age of 3. His condition indeed was so bad that he spent much of his early years in bed. Unable to attend school, his parents hired tutors to teach him from home.
So I guess that's the point where his class background was really useful. Like if he'd been like Lincoln and had a much more humble upbringing, I presume he wouldn't have been able to afford tutors, and who knows if he would have been such a great intellectual as what he eventually became.
Young TD relished the opportunity to learn. Once he had learned how to read, he became a voracious devourer of books. He loved to fill his mind with tales of such Nordic heroes as King Olaf and Eric the Red.
That's going back quite a bit.
He was also fascinated with newspaper stories about the exploits of the famous British explorer, Dr. David Livingstone.
He's an interesting guy.
And he filled his mind with dreams of trekking through uncharted territories and discovering untamed tribes. Young TD showed an unusual...
Okay, I've got to stop it here just because the way that guy said untamed tribes in such a seductive manner is... I think I'm getting slightly attracted to him.
Curiosity about the natural world. One day, on a trip to the market, he came across a dead seal in a butcher's stall. Ooh. He was fascinated with the find and returned daily to study and measure it with a ruler. Eventually, he managed to take possession of the seal's skeleton and take it home, where it became the prize exhibit of his Roosevelt Museum of Natural History, which he had set up in his bedroom. From the age of 16, he began filling his journals with observations about the natural world. His mother regularly took him on trips to the country in order to help alleviate his asthma, and TD made the most of this opportunity to wander around in search of fish, insects, seals, and birds that he could analyse and then write about.
Okay,
The
so
Roosevelt children, they were raised under the
making me
norms of
feeling a little bit self-conscious about the fact that when I was 16, I was playing on the Xbox and this guy was collecting dead seals. So yeah, thanks video for making me self-conscious, but really, really interesting.
Victorian society. As members of the upper class, they didn't mix with the less wealthy, and strict mores of decency were enforced, and manners
That's interesting
and
with the Lincoln
politeness
thing
were
again.
of utmost importance. Sunday night was the day for religious observance, consisting of church, followed by quiet contemplation. TD hated Sundays, as this was the day when he was not permitted to indulge in his natural curiosity of the world. In 1869, when he was 10 years old, TD's family embarked on a tour of Europe.
Nice.
For 12 months, the children were exposed to the great sights of England, Germany, France, and Italy. Yet, TD, he was not impressed. He later wrote, "I cordially hated it, as did my younger brother and sister. Practically all the enjoyment we had was in exploring any ruins or mountains when we get away from our elders and in playing in our different hotels."
So I suppose that's the kind of the classic grand tour of Europe. But yeah, it's obviously fascinating that he hated it so much. But by the sound of things, it may just have been the people he was with his parents. But again, it shows his wealthy background, but he could afford that. Obviously, only a tiny number of Americans would be able to have the luxury of something like a tour across Europe in that time.
When he was 13, TD's father gave him his first shotgun. He was dismayed
very
to find
American.
that he was a terrible shot, which brought ridicule from his peers. When a friend challenged him to hit a billboard in the distance, he discovered the problem, later recalling, "Not only was I unable to read the sign, but I couldn't even see the letters."
Okay.
He was extremely nearsighted, but had never realized it. After telling his father about the problem, he was given a pair of eyeglasses. He wrote in his diary, "I had no idea how beautiful the world was until I got those spectacles."
Touché.
With his improved eyesight, TD was able to become even more obsessive with his nature studies. He learned taxidermy, stuffing and mounting birds that he shot, and adding them to his ever-expanding natural history museum. In the winter of 1870 to 1871, the Roosevelts made a trip to the Mediterranean, visiting Egypt, the Holy Land,
wow.
Syria, Greece, and Turkey. Unlike the trip to
Genuinely
Europe,
slightly
TD
jealous,
loved this
other than
experience. He
Syria.
made the most of the opportunity to shoot exotic birds and then stuff them to take home.
So I said this at the beginning, but this is definitely the Victorian version of the naturalist. Use the best opportunity to shoot exotic birds. I'll say, obviously, I mean, at that time in science, it probably was important because you didn't have very many sort of copies of these species. But a man of his time, for sure.
Him and add to his collection. When he was 13, TD was sent off to Maine for a solo trip to improve his health. On the train journey north, he found himself in a cabin with some other teenage boys. In the skinny, weak, bespectacled, asthmatic boy, they found an easy mark. They roughed him up, leaving him bruised and humiliated. When he returned home, he told his father about the incident. Roosevelt Sr. told his son that he needed to develop his body physically so that he could defend himself. A prize fighter was hired in order to teach the boy how to box. From this point onward, TD became obsessed with building his body. He began lifting weights, doing calisthenics, and running. He developed a great admiration for those who possessed strength and displayed manly virility.
So that's how he became. That's fascinating. So he became such a kind of masculine, rugged individual because of one particular incident, or at least in part because of this one particular incident where he got beaten up. I mean, it's also reassuring that someone in quite a poor physical state, aka me, can manage to improve themselves if they want to. So yeah, there's hope for me. Yeah.
He was also determined to live what he called the strenuous life.
What's that thing he's got on his head?
To move your business online.
Okay, we got a
Go to Fiverr.
we got an advert. I'll
Get your
skip
website
the advert.
developed, marketed across social media, and SEO
Making an absolute hash
optimized,
of
and
this.
you're set. For every step your business takes, Fiverr.
There we go. What's that on his head? Looks like a handkerchief or something.
The Roosevelts were a family that were driven by goals, and after returning from their trip to the Middle East, they set one for their oldest son, and that was to gain entry to Harvard College in just 3 years.
That looks very like Oxford or Cambridge.
He had never gone to school, and although he was skilled in languages, nature, and the classics, he was rather deficient in mathematics. A special tutor was
I can
hired, and over the
sympathise.
next 2 years he worked hard to improve his skills. The hard work, it paid off, and in 1875 he passed the Harvard entrance exams.
Hooray.
For a freshman at Harvard, the childhood name of TD
Brilliant.
would
Yeah.
never have done, so he took to calling himself Theodore. He immediately took to college life, involving himself in political parades, boxing tournaments, and a rowing competition. He also became a skilled debater, taking on professors and
It just seems like even
to his delight, he found
okay, this guy's already what 18, 19. I don't know how old he is, but a very young man, and it already feels like he's achieved more in his life than a lot of people would in their entire lifetime, including probably me. I mean, becoming this obsessive nature collector, being involved in politics and debating and all sorts of things at university. He's a guy that really threw himself into everything, which is very admirable.
himself readily accepted and was soon invited to join some of Harvard's most prestigious societies. Theodore's blissful existence was interrupted during a visit home in his sophomore year. He found
That first year, I
father
presume?
was gravely ill. With his beloved TT bag home,
sad.
the old man's health revived somewhat and the danger seemed to have passed. But when Theodore returned to Harvard for the new year, his father took a sharp turn for the worse. Towards the end of February, Theodore received a telegram to return home urgently. He never made it in time. His father died that very night. Theodore was deeply depressed as a result of his father's death. However, he refused to show any of this pain to others. Instigating a pattern that he would continue for the rest of his life, he soldiered on, disciplining his mind and body to do what had to be done. Still, his grief was evident in his actions. During a summer vacation to Oyster Bay, he rode his horse to exhaustion. When a dog insisted on chasing the horse, he turned and he shot it. Theodore also began hiking, finding a release in the great outdoors. He teamed with a crusty old adventurer by the name of Bill Sewell, who served as his guide. Sewell later recorded his impression of Theodore Roosevelt at the time, stating, "He was fair-minded, Theodore was, and then he took pains to learn everything. There was nothing beneath his notice. I liked him right off. I liked him clear, though. There wasn't a quality in him I didn't like. He wasn't headlong or aggressive, except when necessary, and as far as I could see, he wasn't a bit cocky, though other folks thought so.
Pretty much saying he's a perfect man.
Into quite a character. Never afraid to express his opinion, he could always be counted on to be the centre of attention. His unique outbursts of approval, bully, and delighted became trademark responses. In 1879, he set his charms on a young woman by the name of Alice Lee. See that girl? He said to a Harvard pal. She won't have me, but I'm going to have her.
Okay,
And he did.
That is very pre-Me Too era. I'm assuming it's not actually as bad in reality as it made it sound. It's just a kind of figure of speech. But yeah, that's probably not the language you want to use nowadays.
Alice's heart, leading to their engagement in early 1880. Theodore graduated from Harvard in June of that year, 21st in his class of 160 students. Then, in October, he and Alice were married. After a short honeymoon, Theodore enrolled in a law degree at Columbia University while also working at his uncle's law firm. During his limited leisure time, he decided to learn about the War of 1812. When he couldn't find
That's something I used to do a video on. There must be some good reaction videos to that.
During the summer of 1881, the young couple took a trip to Europe. While in Switzerland, Theodore left his wife behind.
I love that. Love their sideburns.
It was during this trip that he decided to forego a legal career. He was determined to set his sights on becoming a politician.
Okay. So it's interesting. I feel like a lot of people kind of end up in politics, start off doing something else, and then jump
Back then,
across.
politics was actually seen as being beneath men of wealth, and various friends tried to dissuade Theodore's ambitions. But that was always going to be a losing proposition, and on returning to New York, he joined the Republican Party. Here, he was associated with
same
a class
party
of
as
men that he
Lincoln.
hadn't previously mixed with, rough men who were skilled in the low blows and dirty tricks of state politics. Roosevelt soon learned their ways, and within months it won the party's nomination for a seat in the New York State Assembly. It was a solid Republican seat, and he won it handily. Roosevelt turned up to take his seat at the New York State Capitol in Albany on January the 22nd, 1882. He cut the figure of a dandy with his fine suit and his upper-crust ways. He was ridiculed by Democrats as well as Republicans. Despite this, he, according to his own recollection, rose like a rocket in New York politics. Roosevelt's politics, they were grounded in self-determination. He firmly believed that each man was in control of his own destiny. But he also realized that the system was grossly unfair, with those with the money and power having all of the opportunities. He made it his goal to bring about a fairer system where all Americans had the opportunity to succeed. When he wasn't working his way up the political ladder in New York, Theodore ventured out west in order to fulfill his love of adventure and the outdoors. In September
this is
of
where the
1883,
outdoorsman stuff
he made
comes
an
in.
excursion to the Dakota Badlands with the express purpose of bringing home a buffalo.
I don't know. So I don't know if at this time period there were still kind of semi-independent Native American tribes, like the sort of Dakota, because I think they said they went to Dakota. So whether these tribes were still semi-independent or whether that had already been crushed, I'd be kind of interested to know that. Maybe we'll get onto that.
Bowhead as a trophy. As with most things he set his mind to, he was successful in that goal. During this trip, he also purchased a cattle ranch. In November of 1883, Theodore won his third term to the New York State Assembly. He returned to Albany while his wife, who was heavily pregnant with their first child, went to live with his sister. On February the 11th,
Okay.
1884, he
That's not
received
very
a
Me Too
long-awaited
either.
telegram announcing the birth of a baby girl. But this telegram had also told him that Alice was very sick. He rushed
Oh,
home
no.
to discover that the news was even worse. Both his wife and his mother were gravely ill. They both
Oh,
died on the same day, February the 14th, 1884.
That's horrible.
That night he wrote in his diary, "The light has gone from my life."
Poor
Theodore
guy.
responded to the double tragedy with the stoicism that epitomized his personality. After a few days of isolation, he left the baby in the care of his sister and returned to Albany to see out his term in the General Assembly. Life had to go on. Throughout 1884, Roosevelt worked tirelessly to propel himself from state to national politics. His brash, unwavering style brought him the attention of prominent men, including an influential Bostonian by the name of Henry Cabot Lodge. By the end of the year, the 25-year-old was being eyed by many as a future Republican leader. However, inside Roosevelt was an empty man. He needed to get away
So
from...
it's I presume he's still quite young at this point. Quite young to be entering national politics anyway. So I mean, I guess clearly his background helped an awful lot in that respect. But it's impressive how he rose quite so quickly, even with all the advantages he obviously had.
from the rough and tumble of politics in order to heal himself. At the end of 1884, Roosevelt retired from politics and moved to
Blimey, that
ranches
came
in North
quick.
Dakota.
Cowboy. Okay. Okay, so everything I just said
Theodore
about
Roosevelt
politics was
turned up to
wrong.
the small Dakota town
And I
of
was-
Eudora dressed in buckskins. He brandished a brand new Winchester rifle as well as a hunting knife that he'd bought from Tiffany's jewelers. He was the quintessential dude and was
So
soon
Tiffany's,
ridiculed
that's in New York, isn't it? But was it Tiffany's? I assume it's the same place. That's pretty cool.
by the hardened locals. Despite this, he revelled in life in the West. He displayed a steely courage which impressed all those who came to know him. Roosevelt hired his old tramping guide, Bill Sewell, to come out and manage his ranch for him. But he didn't leave all the hard work to his men. He rode out on the range with them, chased spooked cattle, and stood guard during long and bitterly cold nights. In 1886, he captured a group of thieves who had stolen a...
Who would they be guarding from? Would they be guarding from thieves? Well, which obviously just said that, so that's a possibility. Or wild animals, or both. Like I don't know. I don't know what sort of animals there are that are sort of dangerous in the American West. I'd be kind of interested to see if we get into that.
a boat and then took them as prisoners on a 3-day trek to the local sheriff. During
Determined.
those 3 days, he didn't sleep a wink as he kept his rifle trained on his captives. Following the exceptionally harsh winter of 1886 to 1887, which killed half of his cattle stock, Roosevelt, he returned east. He was 30 pounds heavier than when he left and was a harder, more confident version of himself. Soon after
can
returning,
sympathise
he
with that.
met up and fell in love with a childhood friend by the name of Edith Carow. They were married on December the 2nd, 1886, and would go on to have 5 children together.
I'm glad he remarried. That's nice. So he's going back in politics.
Roosevelt was soon approached by Republican leaders and urged to re-enter politics. They wanted him to run for mayor of New York. He accepted and campaigned hard despite having little chance of winning. He came in third place with 27% of the vote. Thinking that his political career was over, he next put his efforts into writing the book The Winning.
I mean, 27%. That's still respectable, I guess. Like that's not an embarrassment. I can think of plenty of prominent politicians who started off doing far worse in major elections.
Of the West. In 1888, Roosevelt gave stump speeches for Republican presidential candidate Benjamin Harrison. When he won the presidency, Harrison was persuaded by Theodore's political champion, Henry Cabot Lodge, to appoint the energetic Roosevelt to the U.S. Civil Service Commission. He took to the role with a vengeance, determined to fight the corrupt spoils system and enforce civil service laws. In 1894, Roosevelt was appointed president of the board of New York City Police Commissioners. He then set about making improvements to the structure of the police force, rooting out corruption and imposing more stringent standards for recruitment. In 1897, again under the urging of Henry Cabot Lodge, new President William McKinley appointed Roosevelt as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy.
Okay, we're probably going to get into this. Was William McKinley the guy who was assassinated? I've got half a feeling he was. I mean, I guess we're going to come into this late in the video. I'm throwing my questions out there. But yeah, the name William McKinley rings a bell.
The strength of the Navy. When, on February the 15th, 1898, the US warship Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, Roosevelt took it upon himself to order a number of ships to prepare for war. When war was declared, a short time later, Roosevelt resigned his post and formed the 1st US Volunteer Cavalry Regiment. He was determined to be in the thick of the action.
Okay.
Well, Brexit was the great fight of my life against the establishment, so that you could be free and
this is a interesting choice of advert.
It's over. 1 or 2 wrinkles.
Yeah, you probably don't get this advert in America. The Rough Riders. Ah, yes. So that's. Hopefully, we're now going to find out who they are.
President Roosevelt's cavalry regiment, the Rough Riders. After a period of training in San Antonio, Texas, they were shipped to Cuba. Their first action was at the Battle of Las Guasimas, where they forced the Spanish to abandon their entrenched positions. On July the 1st, 1898, Roosevelt led his men on the famous charge up Kettle Hill. He was the only man on horseback, making an easy target for the enemy. Still, without any care for his own safety, he rode up and down the line, urging his men up the hill. Also attempting to take the hill were soldiers of
It does make you think there must have been so many potentially great men and women, because it seems that a lot of great leaders are quite open to taking risks. So presumably there must have been a lot of people who would have gone on to do great things, but they just happened to be shot by a bullet. If it gone 1 meter to the left, this guy would have become US president or whatever. And conversely, if something had been slightly different, someone would be aiming their rifle in a slightly different direction, and Roosevelt had got shot and died, then he would have been almost forgotten. He'd be like a footnote in American history. So it's kind of interesting how very small things can have a huge impact on how events turn out.
But these soldiers were having a hard time of it. A reporter for the New York Times recorded the action, stating, "Colonel Roosevelt on horseback broke from the woods behind the line of the 9th and, finding its men lying in his way, shouted, 'If you do not wish to go forward, let my men pass, please.' The junior officers of the 9th with their Negroes instantly sprang into line with the Rough Riders and charged at the blue block house on the right. I speak of Roosevelt first because he was, without doubt, the most conspicuous figure in the charge. Roosevelt, mounted high on horseback and charging the rifle pits at a gallop and quite alone, made you feel that you would like to cheer.
Nice.
He wore on his sombrero a blue polka-dot handkerchief, which, as he advanced, floated out straight behind his head like a guidon.
He does
Having
seem a
reached
very
the crest of
Victorian
the hill,
figure.
Roosevelt dismounted and urged his men to follow him. But there was yet another hill to conquer, and no sooner had the Rough Riders scrambled to the top of Kettle Hill than their dashing colonel set off for San Juan Hill. His men overpowered the Spanish resistance and took possession of both hills. In the process, Roosevelt killed a Spanish trooper who, he said, doubled over like a jackrabbit.
Ooh.
Following victory in Cuba, Roosevelt returned
So
to
I don't know that much about the Spanish-American War, which is something that, again, same with the US-Mexican War. But I think after America took the Philippines and Cuba, at least briefly as colonies, so it was kind of the moment at which America could have turned into a European-style colonial power, so like Britain or France or Spain, and had a kind of global empire. They seemed to toy with that for a while with the Philippines and I think Cuba, but clearly they turned their back on that and they went down a very different route, probably for the best.
Ray was convinced to run for governor. Campaigning vigorously on his war record, he won by just 1% of the vote.
Oh, wow.
During his time as governor, he developed the style and platform which would underpin his later presidency. He was a passionate advocate for the rights of the underprivileged, was against large corporations and monopolies, and championed the preservation of natural resources. In 1900, Henry Cabot Lodge and other prominent Republicans urged Roosevelt to throw his hat into the ring for the vacant Republican vice presidential spot in the upcoming presidential elections. Though reluctant, he won the Republican nomination, pairing with President McKinley. With
Whoa.
his boundless energy, he threw himself into a barnstorming campaign, making 480 speeches in 23 states.
Wow.
In the end, he and McKinley easily won, and Theodore Roosevelt was sworn in as the Vice President of the United States on March the 1st, 1901. 6 months later, President McKinley was shot while attending the Pan American Exposition.
So this was the guy who was assassinated. So I'm guessing that Roosevelt became president because McKinley was assassinated. Then that is not something I was expecting.
York. He died 8 days later. As a result, the 42-year-old Roosevelt was propelled into the highest office in the land, becoming the 26th president of the United
42
States.
is very young to
14th,
be president, surely.
1901. He was the youngest man to ever hold the position.
Very impressive. It's interesting. Also, despite his background, they said he was very concerned with the
Roosevelt was a
underprivileged.
different man to William McKinley. Still, he vowed that he would continue to pursue the policies of his predecessor. At the same time, he was determined to stamp his mark on the presidency in order to win a second term in his own right. A large part of the focus of Roosevelt's domestic policies were focused on breaking up the monopolies of big business. He instituted 44 antitrust suits, forcing the breaking up of the Northern Securities Company and putting regulatory controls on Standard Oil. Of all the domestic policies that Roosevelt was passionate about, however, none came close to the preservation of wildlife and the environment. He established the United States Forest Service, created 5 national parks, and placed a total of 230 million acres of land under public protection.
So I suppose this is also where his love of... I mean, this is the more sort of conventional naturalism rather than just shooting at various animals. But yeah, it's great. It's great those two characteristics often coincided. I mean, clearly this guy is a great lover of nature and left a huge legacy there.
In terms of foreign policy, Roosevelt, he was an ardent imperialist. He successfully mediated the Treaty of Portsmouth, which brought an end to the Russo-Japanese War, winning a Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts. His making of a deal with the Panamanian government for the building of a canal led to the separation of Panama from Colombia in 1903. In the 1904 presidency,
I had no idea. So I had no idea that Panama was only formed in 1903 or 4 from Colombia. I assumed it was a much older country. That's really interesting. So Panama was essentially a creation of the United States. That's fascinating.
election, the Democrats put up Alton Brooks Parker to face off against Roosevelt. Campaigning on the promise to give every American a square deal, Roosevelt won 56% of the popular vote, along with 336 of 476 electoral votes. During his second term in office, Roosevelt began moving to the left of his Republican base. He pushed for a number of pretty radical reforms, including the 8-hour workday, most of which they were defeated in the House. He had declared that he would not seek a third term, and so he became a lame duck president. While thoroughly enjoying...
I didn't actually realise he'd have the chance to seek a third term. So I don't know when it was that, because obviously at the moment there's a 2-term limit. I don't know when that came in. I'm presuming, I guess it must have been after him if he had the possibility to go for a third term. I mean, I guess perhaps I'll find this out on a future video, or I'll probably cheat and Google it straight after this.
The role of president, he felt that staying in office for more than 2 terms would run the risk of dictatorship.
Ah, that's interesting. So I wonder if, whilst we got an advert for Les Miserables, so whilst that plays, I wonder if he kind of created the convention that you only run for 2 terms. I'll have to check that afterwards.
Following the end of his second term in office in March of 1909, Roosevelt went on an African safari with a group of prominent scientists and hunters. The expedition was on behalf of the Smithsonian Institute and was charged with bringing back specimens for the Institute's museums. The trip was successful and the group came back with 11,400 specimens ranging from insects to elephants.
11,000? How did they get them all back? Well, I mean, boat, presumably, but I'm hoping that most of the specimens were more in the kind of the insect size than the elephant size. Otherwise, that would take a fleet to get those all back. That's very impressive.
When he returned to the United States, Roosevelt was far from happy with the performance of his successor, William Taft, believing that Taft had made the Republicans far too conservative. He began to speak loudly of leading a program of new nationalism which emphasized labor over capital. By the time that the 1912 presidential election rolled around, Roosevelt was convinced that only he could save the Republican Party. He challenged Taft in the Republican primary. However, Taft won the nomination, squeezing Roosevelt to the sidelines. Undeterred, Roosevelt quit the Republicans, forming his own party, the Progressives.
Oh,
he ran for president as an independent.
so I didn't know anything about this. Because obviously, I mean, America has a long history of largely unsuccessful third parties. Yeah, no, I do need to find out at some point, because if I'm not mistaken, it didn't start off with Republicans and Democrats. It started off with one of them and like the Whigs or something. So I need to find out how exactly that transition happened, because I guess that's the only major party transition in American history. But yeah, I guess he joins the long list of people who set up not totally successful third parties.
And went to the stumps and appealed to the people. On October the 14th, 1912, Roosevelt was giving a speech in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, when he was struck by an assassin's bullet.
Oh.
This shot was a perfect shot to the heart, and it penetrated his breast pocket and slammed into a thick glasses case. The bullet then thumped into a heavy speech manuscript that he had chosen not to use. Without missing a beat, Roosevelt ensured that the would-be killer was apprehended, then
So that's
on with his speech.
that's
The first words to the crowd after being hit were, "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot. It takes more than that to kill a bull moose."
What an incredible reaction! That's like a superhuman reaction, and also incredibly lucky. Like going back to what we were saying earlier about how very small changes can have a huge impact on history. So by sound of things, if he hadn't had his glasses case or his speech there, he could possibly have done. Which, thinking about it, I'm now going to have my glasses case there for the rest of the video. I don't know if you can see that, just in case.
In Roosevelt's pectoral muscle until his death. The 1912 presidential election was won by the Democratic candidate Woodrow Wilson with
so he was the president during the First World War.
However, Roosevelt did beat the incumbent president with 27% compared to.
So that's very good for a third party
During
candidate.
a South American expedition in 1913 to 1914, Roosevelt contracted tropical fever after suffering a leg wound which became badly infected. By the time he returned to New York, he was 50 pounds lighter and deathly pale.
Oh, the old lion is dead. Yeah. I thought this was coming.
The last few years were racked with pain for the once robust outdoor adventurer. Malaria bouts were common, as were complications.
I mean, it must have been really hard for him as such a kind of like an active, energetic man to have been totally laid low by disease and by illness.
Of his leg inflammation. The end came.
I mean, someone like me who's relatively lazy can probably stomach it better than someone who used to have a very energetic and active lifestyle.
Hours of January the 6th, 1919, after he had complained about not being able to breathe the night before. The doctor was summoned, and after some treatment, he felt better. However, he died in his sleep as a result of a blood clot in the lungs. When
Rest
he
in
heard of
peace.
his father's demise, his oldest son Archibald telegraphed his siblings with the words, "The old lion is dead." Theodore Roosevelt, he was 60 years old.
Quite the
If you
life
found
he
that
had.
video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to
Yes,
subscribe.
no, that was fascinating. I mean, he was everything I expected him to be and more, to be honest. I knew he had a reputation for being macho, but he went even beyond. He's sort of like Chuck Norris squared, is how I'm going to think of this guy. He did even more than. I mean, it seems that he did more than in his life. He did more than like most people would or sort of more than like 50 people would in most of their normal lives. So yeah, an incredibly energetic guy. Really, really interesting person. I'd actually be interested to know more about him. But I don't know if there's any more videos. But anyway, so once again, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. And the whole YouTuber like, comment, subscribe, share, all that jazz. And I hope to see you again. Thank you.